educational opportunities for young men and women beyond the traditional college, all from a Christ-centered perspective. I'm Lee Bortons, and I'm with my co-host, Amanda Kleist. Today is Wednesday, September 27th, 2023, and we're joined by Greg Wilbur of New Franklin College and a number of other endeavors associated with classical education. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
Absolutely, delighted to be here.
So, why don't you start off by just giving us a little bit of your background and tell us about, it seemed like 3 or 4 things. I'll ask questions one at a time, but about the college and about your music background and some of the opportunities you have that are unusual markers and milestones for Christian children and adults.
Yeah, my background is actually in music. And so I studied music in college and got a master's in composition and entered into teaching classical education a few years after I graduated. And that eventually led to a homeschool co-op and then the process of founding and starting New College Franklin and having that opportunity for students to enter into a conversational aspect of education. So that's the part of that process in terms of how music then led into that, particularly with regards to understanding the quadrivium and the discipleship aspect of education.
So I'd like to ask some logistical questions, but I want to make sure we end with some quadrivium and music questions. So when it comes to New College Franklin, is it accredited? What degrees does it offer? What's some of the price points? Is it residential? Just describe what it is for our listeners.
Right. It's an intentionally small discipleship-centered education. So we're dealing with the big questions, the great conversation, and doing so in around a table. So we're intentionally small. We're around 50 students at this point. Our students house them in they join together and rent apartments, or they have host families. And we have 1 degree program, which is the liberal arts. So the idea being that the 7 classical liberal arts, the Trivium and the Quadrivium, foundation of the great books, was always the precursor to then further studies, whether that was theology, philosophy, medicine, law, etc. And so then our students go with that 1 degree into all sorts of other endeavors. So tuition is currently around $12,000. We do not take government funding of any sort, and we do have some scholarships in-house. And we are accredited as well.
Who's your accreditation through?
TRACS, Transnational Association of Christian Colleges.
And then kind of like in the vein of New St. Andrews, do you expect to only have 1 degree that's liberal arts ever, or are you looking to expand?
I think we do. We just the 1. I mean, we've considered the idea of minors and things, but our graduates have gone on to do everything from medicine to law to teaching to ministry to politics, business. Several have started businesses, so they've gone on finance. You know, it has served them well in terms of moving on into other areas of endeavor and fields of study.
Do you find your student body is almost all from classical and homeschools, or is it more diverse, or what's?
No, that's a great question. I think primarily it is mostly from homeschool or from co-ops of some sort, not even classical schools per se. There's a few, but it's primarily.
Why do you think that is?
I have my theories. I think one of the theories is that there's this sense of, and I've actually heard people express this, that if you go through I was going to say traditional classical school, but I'm not even sure what a traditional classical school is anymore. I think it's a pretty wide term that covers a whole variety of things. But just like there's homeschooling and homeschooling and homeschooling, I think classical has a whole multiple definitions. I think students, when they get to the end of that, or parents or administrators have told them, now you've gotten your classical education and go forth and do, more traditional education, that you're ready for that. I'm more of the mindset that you've made all these sacrifices and you've made these decisions for what you think is in the best interest of your child. Why would you change the course now?
That's how I feel with a lot of families who they look at high school and think, okay, I'm done homeschooling, or you don't need any more Christian education.
Right. Yes. And Exactly, and it extends, I think, even into the college years as well. We do have quite a few CC families as well that we attract along the lines as well. They see similarities in the conversational model of what we're doing, and that has served them well in the context. And the other aspect too about schools is that a school is always in the need, the process of acquiring new students. And so they need to advertise well. And one of the ways that they advertise to prospective parents is look what prestigious colleges our graduates have gone to. And traditional, either Christian colleges or a college like ours, a micro college, doesn't usually fit the context of success from the standpoint of somebody who's graduated a typical classical Christian school program.
Do you think it's just a bridge too far for most families to get beyond K-12 and think about what is the quadrivium and how does trivium education not be trivial education because the world says it's not STEM? Like, what are the philosophical barriers?
Well, I think, for one, there's and this statistic is a few years old. I haven't updated it, but a few years ago, 90% of Christian families do not even consider Christian higher education at all for their children. So any sort of program and that is faith-based in the higher education is not even on the radar. Mm-hmm. And so if you've already shrunken the pool, there's also, I think, prejudice against the liberal arts in terms of what are you going to do with that? What's the practical outcome of that? How do you utilize that? But I think that's also a misnomer too, because when people talk about the liberal arts, they're usually talking more broadly about the humanities. And what we're talking about at New College is the classical 7 liberal arts. And so we're much more focused and historic in the context of the 7. So this, people ask us along the same lines too. What's your acceptance rate? It's really high, because anybody who's decided that they want to go to a Christian school that's really small, that has 1 degree, that's doing this weird thing called the quadrivium, in which you're going to be in the small class and you're going to be discussing ideas with professors and other students. Anybody who actually fills out an application and gets that far has already jumped a lot of hurdles. And so they're already kind of in the mindset of that this is something that they're really looking for.
Sure. So you're self-selecting good students. So go ahead, Amanda, ask some questions.
So Greg, I realize that we are using some insider language.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And not everybody who sees us could name 7 arts. Could you help us by slowing down just a little bit and saying, what are those 7 things?
Yes. So the 7 classical liberal arts would be the trivium and the quadrivium. So the trivium with regards to grammar, logic, and rhetoric, or dialectic and rhetoric. And the quadrivium, historically recognized as arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. But that's a bit of a misnomer too, because when we talk about things like arithmetic, especially when we talk about things like arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, we've got our own conception of what that is. And what the quadrivium is seeking in terms of the integration of those 4 disciplines is something different. And so that's a more full aspect of from the historic perspective, what those disciplines would have been and for what purpose. I think in some ways, going back to your question earlier too, even those who understand aspects of classical education don't always have the fullness of an understanding of quadrivium. And the trivium, they feel like we've already done that. And so why would you continue to do that then on a college level? But the integration of the aspect of language and number and the way creation works is a whole other beautiful thing and a whole other endeavor. And so I think, you think, okay, we've got, I've taken algebra and trig. What are you talking about arithmetic? That's elementary school, right? But when you start looking at the idea of not only number as a quantitative element, but a qualitative element, and how those numbers relate to one another in the context of geometry, how that then further on further moves into not just music in terms of like music theory, but music in terms of a broader sense of harmony, which applies to not only music itself, but to society, to culture, to your own soul. What does it mean to live harmoniously? What does it mean to resolve discord? That things are in a place of shalom, of the rightness of how things are supposed to be, and then add to that not just astronomy, but the cosmological aspect of that, the great dance, the music of the spheres, and the great dance. It's a much more significant study than defining those in our typical way. So that, yeah, the insight, the fullness then of those seven, which were traditionally seen as the precursors then to all sorts of other studies. It's from there, if you understand these things, then you can then move on to other study, other thought, because those are just kind of the foundational aspects of how to think and how to understand the world around you.
Yeah. So some of the things you just said, like music and harmony and peace, that doesn't sound like a college curriculum. Convince me that it is.
Oh, that's a great question.
You don't have to convince me. I actually believe it, but my audience may not.
Right. Well, I'm thinking, yeah, what's the best approach on this? Yeah, for one thing, thinking from the historic perspective, that was part of the educational process. From the medieval, Boethius talks about the quadrivium. Boethius wrote a book on music. He's much more well known for Consolation of Philosophy, but he did write a book on the principles of music. Augustine wrote a book on music as well. And so, you've got Augustine as a church father, especially after his conversion. One of the first things he does is writes this book on music. And his intent was to write one on all the seven liberal arts, but he got distracted by a number of other things. But at least he got half of the book on music done. So there was an understanding there that the liberal arts and the classical liberal arts and music as part of that was a significant part of what education was supposed to be. That it's not just it's not music appreciation or music history or music theory. It's a deeper study than that. And so, when part of what Augustine talks about in his book De Musica is he never actually gets to harmony. His book is primarily about rhythm, and so he's talking about poetry, and that poetry is music, and from there, there's the discussion continue. He talks about the relationship of numbers to one another in relationship to one another, which some of that is derived from Pythagoras through Plato, etc. But you see the way that numbers then play into idea of rhythm, which then has further implication with regards to harmony. And one of the things you realize too, part of the study, even this past year, as I was teaching this course, if you take a polyrhythm, which would be, for example, 3 beats against 2 beats. So for every 2 beats, you've got 3 beats happening at the same time. That's a relationship of 3 to 2. It's a ratio of 3 to 2. And working through the math of things, a ratio of 3 to 2 is what we would call the interval of a fifth in music. So the harmony of a fifth. If you speed up the rhythm, just rhythm, non-pitched rhythm, if you speed that up faster and faster and faster, it eventually sounds in your ear as an oral fifth. So the number itself then turns into sound. And so there's a very real sense in which sound is sped up rhythm, and rhythm is slowed down sound. And then you have the opportunity to work all this out with regards to mathematical formula. How do acoustics work? How do harmonics, how are they a part of mean, it's it's physics here. How does that work in terms of the context of what sound is? And then exploring that from the philosophical and the theological and the historic perspectives kind of rounds out the, back to your question of how do you turn that into a college course? There's so many different paths to think through. I had my students also write 16th century counterpoint to actually get their hands dirty on looking at intervals and how they play with one another. And then having that as part of what we did as well. So all those things then feed in together. But talking even the soulish aspect of what does it mean to live in harmony? What does it mean to be of one-mindedness, a pure heart, as Scripture says?
That was all really good. I'm still trying to figure out how to explain it to the average person who doesn't know what you just said. But I loved what you said. Here's why, because the quadrivium is going to become more and more interesting to more and more people as our body of classical trivium students grow. And I know you're part of this thing called you're a fellow at the Quadrivium Project. Tell us what that is.
So a few years ago, I was, there are different people who are thinking about this from different perspectives and different angles, mathematicians or musicians or other folks. And my hope was to pull together people who could then share what they're doing and help all of us be able to talk about things. Because there are very few people, well, probably none really. If I'm sliding somebody, I apologize, but that has a deep level of all four of those. And so you've got people. Yeah, you've got people who are approaching, who are mathematicians, and they're approaching, arithmetic and geometry from a more historic classical perspective, but they don't really understand music, or they don't have the physics or the astronomy aspect. You've got musicians, but they're not thinking about math or how music relates to geometry. And so the hope was that all these people would be in the same room to be able to talk to one another. And so we had a couple gatherings in which we pulled people together to just kind of share ideas. What are you working on? What are you thinking about? What are the problems that we see? I mean, I think with the quadrivium especially, and I think you're absolutely right, there is going to be a resurgence of this. The quadrivium has unique difficulties in terms of its recovery. With the trivium, I mean, at some point, parents have to fill out some sort of graduation requirements for their state. Higher education is going to be looking at what classes did you take in high school of some sort or another. And the trivium, classes in the trivium can be written up in such a way that they look, normal. It's a writing class or it's a rhetoric class. It fulfills a writing requirement. It fulfills an English requirement. The trivium classes fulfill the high school graduation requirements in a much neater way than to say that for one of my lab sciences, I took music. There's no category for that. They expect the general form of, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, trig, calc, etc. That's the expectation in terms of college graduation, high school graduation, college entrance requirements. And so that's a bit of a hurdle there. But one of the things with the trivium, I mean, just make an analogy here. You can argue that Augustine was one of the best educated people in one of the best ever, in a whole number of ways. He never read Shakespeare. He never read Dante. He never read Aquinas. He didn't even have to read himself. He had all the tools that he needed in terms of being educated, but without all the other things that we rightly want our students to know. We want them to read Shakespeare. We want them to read Jane Austen. We want them to have all these other aspects of literature. And so there are ways in which we've, adopted and adapted that 1,500 years of history into what we teach with regards to literature or rhetoric or writing. The same work, I don't think, has been done in the quadrivium. And so there's that sense of what was the historic quadrivium? What was it for? What do we hope to regain from it? What do we do with all the developments and the ideas of mathematics and physics and astrophysics in the last several hundred years? And how does that integrate in what kind of way?
Yep.
And that's a daunting task.
It's something that I like to do is think of things that the average person can relate to, just to begin the conversation about it.
Mhm.
So for instance, I think about when my babies were born and they just first are alive, and that heartbeat is so fast and you see it coming out of their chest, and there's that rhythm and there's that joy. And then you think to yourself, what did I just do? I just gave birth to something that's hurtling at 1,000 miles an hour around around the globe, let alone the universe. And
Mhm.
that it's not into so STEM has made it so that we look down so much that we can't look up into the astronomy and nature and creation, and that we have to start writing, I think there's like you're part of this, writing articles, not maybe about the quadrivium, but just about the joy and beauty of what God has
Mm.
naturally given us, and inspiring people to say, and by the way, when you're studying anything on this earth, you're studying astronomy. Earth's a
Yeah.
planet, right? That give them things they can hang on to.
Right.
And so
Right.
we're about 20 years away, I think, from getting that to where I would like it to be.
Yeah, I think this is a poor attempt at remembering a Chesterton quote, but he says something about the difference between trying to pour the cosmos into your head as opposed to getting your head into the cosmos. And we want to so much of modern science or modern education is trying to learn things as opposed to what does it mean to look out and the wonder and the glory of what it is that God has made. I mean, Romans 1 talks about how God has revealed himself in the things that he's made, even his eternal power, his divine attributes since creation. And I believe that's so much more than just a volcano is powerful and majestic and God is powerful and majestic. I mean, I think it's down to the root of the God spoke creation into being, and the word, the logos, the way in which you can express everything through number of some sort and relationship of number. Augustine talks about the fact that we shouldn't be trying to measure the cosmos, that the cosmos is itself an interrelationship of all things to each other. And that's a whole different kind of idea to approach the interrelatedness of how this truth then helps us understand this truth.
These are some really big ideas. And wow, wouldn't it be great to be in the conversation in the room where this is happening? Hey, wait a minute, we are in this podcast. So I want to take us a slightly different direction back to your shalom piece, because I agree about the quadrivium piece, but I am a little bit fascinated about this unity of harmony. When you have the dissonance and the harmony, how are you seeing that outwork in your students in New Franklin in their local church body?
That's a great question. And I think there is one part of part of the consideration in terms of all education is there's an ethical component, of course, and it's not. We're always in danger of knowing more than we're actually doing. And so, John talks about that in his letters, right? And so it's not it's not about filling up kids with information, or even that they've read great books. How does it change who they are? How do they live that out? And so that aspect too of, especially as we talk about the soulish aspect of harmony, of living in harmony as opposed to discord. I mean, there is that very basic level of sin brought discord, and Christ brings shalom, peace through the blood of the cross. So, in the very basic level, that's relationship to Christ in terms of how one is walking with Christ. But then, what does that mean in terms of what time do you go to bed? How are you? What are you eating? What kind of harmony is there in your diet? How much activity do you have in addition to sitting and reading? We are body, soul, and spirit. And so what does it mean to live those things in harmony, to be the person who God has called you to be, so that you can be the person that he has called you to be to those around you? And that's part of loving our neighbor. And so to your point, then, we require students to be involved in church of some, they can choose. It's not a required particular church, but I mean, we really encourage them to not just attend on Sunday mornings, but to participate in the ministry of the church and to get to know people of various ages. It's so easy for college students just to know their peers, but really want them to find mentors and disciples outside of the college as well as inside the college who can be part of their life. And you need to do that through the local body of the church and find ways in which you can serve. So that's part of the living out of that.
So how does New Franklin require it?
So I mean, church attendance is required, and then but the constant encouragement of checking in with students of, are you settled in church yet? And you realize, students, it's probably the first time in their life that they've chosen a church to go to. They've always been to whatever church their parents have gone to mostly. First time they've lived alone. They're trying to figure out who they are in this context of a new community. There's a lot of questions about who am I and what am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing? And that's one of the things we would talk about with regards to, no matter where your child goes to college, they're going to be asking those questions. The question you need to be asking is, who do you want to be around your child as they're asking those questions? What kind of influences you want as they do that? So I went out to lunch with one of the freshman guys today and just talking to him about how things were going in his spiritual life, personal life, his church, the church that he's been visiting. Is he meeting people? Who is he meeting there? What does it look like being involved there? And providing just kind of the accountability to make sure they're following through on that commitment.
That sounds like a very integrated way relationally of asking those questions, and a mentor type experience, asking how is he doing as one of the ways you guys encourage it. So then I could be that parent who isn't real musical. My kids didn't have music lessons. I just couldn't get that done with our finances or whatever it was, and I didn't grow up with it. Is New Franklin something my kids could even think about?
Yes, I mean, we're talking about music, but that's just one part of a holistic curriculum. I mean, we also have a required art class, and most of our students have not studied art, but they learn. And by second semester, they are doing sculpture. And at the end of second semester, their sophomore year, they've at least created something that looks like a person. It may not exactly look like a model, but it does look like a person. Yeah. So, but there's something so important about having your hands on, actually doing that, incarnating that knowledge, and getting your fingers dirty in the clay, and making that, and just not talking about the theory of something, but actually working it out. And so there are classes that always some students are going to excel in more than others, but there's not a part of the challenge that we have in those classes, like for example, music, as you mentioned, some students come in with a lot of musical knowledge, and that's very true. Others have none, but they teaching classes in such a way that they're not penalized for not having had that experience, but also teaching them in such a way that students who have had that background don't skate through and are bored by stuff that they already know. And so it's the balance there of and it works. I mean, they are learning things. For example, when I taught the quadrivium class in music this past year, I approached it from a whole different direction, so that even people who had knowledge of music hadn't learned it the way that we were talking about it. And so it added to the things that they already knew. They had a better vocabulary to talk about some things, and they helped their classmates along in those areas. But those who hadn't had that experience weren't behind. I think one of the best successes in that class, I had a child in that class. It was a senior who liked music, couldn't sing on pitch, didn't really have any understanding of music at all. And by the time at the end of the year, they were writing compositions. They had learned to sing and on pitch, and because we actually sang some in class. And they commented to me the other day that, I don't know what you did to me, but there are certain instrumental pieces now that I can't listen to without crying. And so somebody who, a whole different genre and a whole different arena of music suddenly understands it in a much deeper, intuitive way, and they've grown in that, and it's a beautiful thing.
Thanks for
So
letting me ask that basic question. I
Oh, sure.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
that was
When I
good.
think,
So I want to know, because we're around time and I still have a lot of questions for you. So I want to ask you, 10 years from now, someone has gone through New Franklin. What are they going to look back on and say, my time in New Franklin gave me this marker or this milestone that really formed me? What's the one thing you feel like you can help folks hang on to and want to
yeah.
see happen? Because I know it varies with everybody, but
Right. I think the most significant thing is that they're going to see that they are not the same person that they were when they entered. And we were talking about the difference between who you are versus what you do, and that's a little abstract, but it's very concrete as you see it played out in people's lives, and it's concrete because they will identify that with particular conversations and particular books that they read in community, that changed the way that they thought about things and changed their understanding of the world and changed their understanding of who God is. And that's there's education is never just a list. It's never just a process that if you read these particular books, you're going to get X product at the end. And so the way that students develop and the things that hit them in different ways. But I think universally, that's the things that they remember, the time that people invested in them and the conversations and the relationships that form them in particular ways.
to the people, that's a really good answer, because it's not the degrees or the content, the paper. The
Right.
content's wonderful, but
Yes.
I remember my professors who that changed my life. So
Right.
that's
Right.
good to say that. So you also belong to this thing called the Three Harmony Alliance. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
But what is that?
So that was a bit of an outgrowth of the Quadrivium summits. One of the recognitions of those conversations was that music lagged far behind other aspects of the Quadrivium. That well-educated people that I respect highly had no concept of why music should be in the Quadrivium. And I'll go, as I said, I studied music. That's my bias. Okay, I'll go ahead and admit that. But I tend to look at anybody who's writing about the Quadrivium and see what they say about music. And if they don't have a clear understanding of how music fits, then it makes me wonder if how they're doing on the other ends of the Quadrivium. I mean, that may be a bit unfair, and that's not the only litmus test, but because it kind of helps me understand a little bit about where they're coming from. And I think in part of there are people who are interested in the Quadrivium who are very much math driven. There are people interested in the Quadrivium who are very philosophically driven. There's a variety of approaches to that. We try to actually do both of those things, which is a little bit unique as well, since we have 4 years of that. So my hope then, especially with my music background, was to do something that was more focused then on making sure that there was a constant opportunity for music to enter into the conversation and not get squeezed out of any curriculum projects or any sort of endeavors that moved forward, that kept kind of beating the drums, so to speak, no pun intended, but there's a consideration here that you need to make as part of any sort of quadrivial project. So I mean, I envision that hopefully in time to provide resources, maybe a curriculum. I don't know. That's a huge endeavor. I think there needs to be an integrated aspect, but at least writings and other ideas that get that concept out.
Mm-hmm. Back to New Franklin, I forgot to ask you about this. Do the students have any work opportunities to help pay for the bills?
In terms of on campus or in terms of in the community?
Just enough time to do it, or something you offer specifically?
We try to keep tuition low from the standpoint, there's a fair number of students who pay for their own way through. And so between working summers and working holidays and working somewhere between 10, 20 hours a week, students are pretty much able to pay their tuition. And that's kind of ideal. I mean, we don't want students to graduate with debt for any host of reasons. One is it keeps you from being able to move into the next phase of life easily. Keeps you certainly from being entrepreneurial or taking on ministry-minded positions because you have to pay off some sort of student loan. So students, yeah, most students work somewhere between 10, 20 hours a week. Freshmen sometimes wait a little bit before they do so, just to get an idea of the workload before they commit to that.
So one of the things I'm wondering about is 10 years out, will the students from an institution like yours be proud that they paid their college bills? Because with what's going on now and the government coming in and paying everybody off who has a loan, that's a hurdle right now. People don't want to pay their own bills. They know somebody else is about to pay for everything. Do you get those kind of students? Because you said you guys are like Grove City or like CC, like a number of others of us who have said no shekels, no shackles. Do they care about that when they come? Do they care about that when they leave?
Some of them certainly do, and that's very much a selling point. But at the same time, what we've been able to manage with regards to the amount of tuition is often less than students have to pay out of pocket anyway by the time they get federal funding. I mean, that's part of the dirty secret of higher ed, right? You keep inflating the cost because government subsidies keep increasing, or government funds keep increasing. And so, you'll find a college that a private Christian school or something that has tuition somewhere in 30 to 35,000. Nobody pays that. They reduce that. They give stipends. They give federal financial aid, and you wind up paying somewhere half of that. Well, half of that is still more than our full tuition. And so we don't have an aquatic center. We don't have 50-acre campus. We don't have a dining hall, or large dorms, or a huge presidential mansion, or a stadium, or anything like. We've kind of focused in on, I don't know, education. The professor and the student with books around a table. And so because of that, we've been able to eliminate a lot of the bloatedness of administration and bureaucracy, and concentrated tuition on what really matters.
Paying the professors might be nice. So how many professors are there per student? Both of the way around.
Oh, see, I'm going to have to think about current numbers. We have some full-time professors, and we have several adjuncts depending on the course. And so let me see, at last count, we're somewhere around 12 to 14 professors. I can't remember. And we're around 50 students. So it's a pretty good ratio of faculty to students.
So what would be your largest class? Like 20 kids in one and 2 in others, or what's the...
Yeah, our senior class is currently 8 students. Our freshman class is 17.
No,
So,
I mean in a classroom setting.
Oh, in a classroom setting, yes. So yes, our electives are can be somewhere between like 5 or 6, and our freshman class is 17, and we cap that. And that was kind of a large cap. I mean, if we grow beyond that, we'll probably be looking at cohorts. And so to keep the number in the classroom down to around 14, somewhere between 12, 14, 15, because conversation is difficult beyond that number.
Sure, you can't do it. So your professors that are working with you, do a lot of them have other jobs?
Our full-time professors don't, and like I said, unless they have other significant hobbies. Like one of our professors is an author, and so she's writing various things here and there. Our adjunct professors tend to be people who are practicing in their field. So like we have a pastor who's teaching one of the theology classes. We have an artist who teaches the art class, and so we've been really blessed with professors. Our current music professor has like 20, almost 30 years experience teaching in higher education, and she wanted to do something different than full-time working where she was, and so she's eminently qualified to teach the freshman, beyond qualified to teach the freshman class. But it's a whole different experience for her, and so we wind up having these highly qualified folks who have time and desire to step into the classroom in various ways.
Any other questions, Amanda?
Well, I just would like you to remind us, Greg, Franklin, where is it in the great country of the United States?
Yes, but Franklin is just south of Nashville. So we're
in Tennessee.
In Tennessee. So we're practically in the middle of Tennessee, north to south, east to west. So beautiful rolling hills, close to a lot of different things, from symphonies to Broadway shows to all sorts of music and other opportunities. But it's a beautiful area of the country and pretty easily located to any number of places in the western and the eastern half of the U.S.
And your
Incidentally,
website.
too.
Okay.
Incidentally, it reminds me too. We have students from all over the U.S. In Canada, Alaska, California, the Northeast, Oregon. You know, our students have come from all over. It's pretty remarkable. That's not quite what we expected when we started. The majority is not from Tennessee. You know, they come from all over and from different faith backgrounds and different experiences. So there's a nice diversity there too.
What's your male-female ratio?
We're currently, let me see, it's somewhere around, I think, 60-40 female.
That's pretty typical for colleges now. Okay, any other questions, Amanda? Otherwise, I'll let him sell his URL.
Yeah, let's hear his URL. But there were more questions. We just don't have the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That would be fun. Yeah, it would be great to do this again sometime, even just offline, just to be able to chat. So yeah, it's newcollegefranklin.edu.
Okay. And then do you have any deadlines coming up that the audience should know about?
Yeah, great. Thank you. We do have our first application deadline November 1st. We are a CLT exclusive school, so there are, I think, 2 more testing dates between now and then. And the application can be found through the website, and someone will help walk people through that.
And CLT is Classical Learning Test, if I remember.
Yes,
what it stands for.
correct. Classic learning test, yes.
So for people who don't know, that's instead of the ACT or SAT or some state exam.
Correct, yes.
They were in the press just recently with the Wall Street Journal and with some things being said about Florida. So yes, CLT.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, thanks, Greg, for being with us. And Amanda, thanks for joining me one more time. It was really great to hear from you, Greg. And I look forward to coming to Tennessee and having a conversation about the quadrivium.
That will be great. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.